Welcome to the recorded training for the Emission Units section of the Facility Inventory in SLEIS. In order to navigate to the Emission Units information for your facility, click the Login link at the welcome screen and type in your SLEIS user account credentials. You will be taken to the My Facilities screen where you can see a list of all the facilities your account has been linked to. Some SLEIS users may only have one facility linked to their account, while other users may have multiple facilities linked to their account. Click the Open button under the Actions heading on the right side of the screen for the facility you would like to view information for. Once you click the Open button, you will be brought to the My Report screen. This report screen will list all the emissions reports that are available for you to view or submit for once the DNR has created the report. In this case, we are looking at the 2016 emissions report, and you will notice the status is in process. Upon first logging in and viewing your 2016 emissions report, a button with a play icon will be listed. This indicates the report has not yet been started. Click this button to begin working on your emissions report. In this case, the emissions report has already been started, so the status is in process. Once you click the Open button on the My Report screen, you'll be taken to the 2016 emissions report screen for the facility. At this screen, you will be able to view the facility inventory and the emissions report. This screen allows the user to view or edit information related to the facility, release points, control devices, emission units, unit processes, and emissions. Click the Emission Units button to update information related to emission units at your facility. After clicking the Emission Units button, a listing of emission units at your facility will appear on the screen. This screen allows you to sort by identifier, emission unit type, and emission unit status. The default setting for the display of emission units is in ascending order. Click the identifier header and the emission units will be listed in descending order. In the upper right corner of the screen, there is a filter box. If your facility has a large number of emission units, you can use the filter box to save time when navigating directly to an emission unit you would like to update. Simply type in the emission unit identifier or emission unit description, and SLEIS will shorten the list of emission units to those that have matching results to the criteria you enter in the filter box. SLEIS also allows you to export data related to all of the emission units that are listed for your facility. Click the Export button in the lower left corner to download a CSV file which contains information related to your emission units. A folder will open with 4 files. Click the Emission Units CSV file to view the information related to the emission units at your facility. You also have the ability to add an emission unit at your facility if you have the editor role. Having the editor role also allows you to edit information related to emission units. To add an emission unit, click the Add button in the lower right corner of the screen. You must provide the emission unit identifier for the emission unit that you are adding. Throughout the SLEIS database, required data is indicated by a red bar on the left side of the data field. The database will not let you save the record you are on until all required fields have been data entered. When naming the identifier for your emission unit, please be consistent with the way the construction permit was issued for the emission unit. In other words, please reference the cover letter of your construction permit for the emission unit to obtain the correct identifier. Once you make a successful save for the emission unit, the identifier will not be able to be edited in the future. So make sure the identifier that you use is one that the facility would like to permanently have. Next, you need to select an emission unit type for the identifier. This can be done by clicking in the field to activate a drop-down menu. Please select the unit type that best represents the description for the emission unit identifier you are working on. If you are unable to find an emission unit type that is comparable to your piece of equipment, you can select the code 999 for unclassified. The emission unit description field should give a brief description of the piece of equipment you are trying to save and SLEIS. A description of the emission unit may be available on the cover page of the construction permit for this piece of equipment. The status is automatically defaulted to operating because it is a new emission unit that was just added. If you are trying to change a status for an emission unit from operating to either permanently or temporarily shut down, the status date becomes a required field. A red bar will not show, but a validation error message will occur if you do not enter a status date for emission units that are permanently or temporarily shut down. For demonstration purposes, I will change the emission unit status back to operating. At this point, the user may click the Save button in the lower right corner of the screen. SLEIS will notify the user if the changes were successfully saved or if there are any validation errors associated with the emission unit. Moving on to the Additional Information tab, none of the data elements that are listed are required. The information displayed is the data related to emission units that was migrated from SPARS to SLEIS that was considered to have value-added information to stakeholders or DNR air quality staff. However, none of these data fields are required to be reported. That being said, two fields that may be helpful are the permit or rule limit text and the federal enforceable limit text. The permit or rule limit text field may contain the construction permit number associated with the emission unit. The federal enforceable limit field may contain pound per hour emission limits, hour per year operational limits, or annual material usage limits. The construction limits description field may have permit limits populated as well. Once the user is done updating the information for the emission unit identifier, the Save button should be clicked. If there are no validation errors, the user may click the Back button to navigate back to the list of emission units at the facility. You'll notice under the Actions heading, there are two buttons for each emission unit. I'm logged in as an editor for this facility. Therefore, I have the right to edit any of the emission unit information that I choose. If I only have a viewer role for the facility, I would only see the View button, and the Edit button would not be displayed. The rights each user has in SLEIS are completely dependent upon the role that is indicated on the SLEIS electronic reporting registration form. In order to edit an emission unit, the user would click the Edit button under the Actions heading for the emission unit they are interested in maintaining. The business rules of SLEIS that apply while a user is in edit mode are the same as when a user is creating a new identifier. If you see a piece of equipment in your emission units list that is no longer in operation and you do not want it to appear in your emissions report for future emission years, click the Edit button for the emission unit that you would like to permanently shut down, and you will be taken to the emission unit screen for that emission unit. Then, change the status from operating to permanently shut down and provide a status date. If you provide a status date that is during the emissions year you are reporting, SLEIS will still include that emission unit along with its unit processes in the emissions report. In order to keep this emission unit and its related unit processes out of the emissions report, it needs to have a status date that is before the beginning of the emissions year. So in this example, we're looking at the 2016 emissions report, and we know that by looking at the top of the screen. The user would need to enter a date of December 31st, 2015 or earlier in order for this emission unit to not appear in the emissions report when we go click on the Process Emissions button for this facility. The user must click the Save button before SLEIS will remove that emission unit from the emissions report. This concludes the recorded training for the emission unit section of the facility inventory in SLEIS.